Our last speaker for this session is Yoni Furas, Dr. Yoni? Jonathan. Yoni Furas, who is a senior lecturer in the Department of Middle Eastern Islamic Studies at the University of Haifa. Yoni presents himself as a scholar of modern Middle Eastern and Palestinian history, interested in the history of late Ottoman and Mandate Palestine, the sociology of Arab knowledge, and cultural aspects of the Palestinian-Zionist conflict. His first book, entitled Write Down, ! We Are a Nation, a political biography of Musa Kazem al-Husseini, was published in Hebrew in 2017. And his second book, Educating Palestine, Teaching and Learning History Under the Mandate, was published by Oxford University Press in 2020, and is based on his PhD, which he wrote at the University of Oxford. I mentioned just one other publication of Yoni, Old Arabs, New Arabs, Debating Palestinian Pedagogy During the Mandate, an article that was published in Middle Eastern Studies. Yoni will address us on wishful thinkers, Egyptian, Iraqi, and Palestinian pedagogical reformers during the interwar period. Please.
Good morning, everyone. I would also like to thank Billie and Liat for inviting me. I've learned so much until now. I hope to learn more. And also to Hillary, which our works complement each other, and I've learned so much from her work thus far. But also because, we're going to talk about the exact opposite of tests now. So this is great. This was a great it wasn't an introduction, it was a great paper, but I'm going to talk about the opposite. And one last thing about the introduction is coming here and returning back and then coming back. I met 3 taxi drivers and I talked to them about what's going on now in Israel. And I understood that the way I understand what's going on in this country, that being someone who read an entry, a Wikipedia entry of Michel Foucault, and meeting someone who perhaps has not, looks at things completely differently than me. And this is interesting because it's an earthquake. I think it's the greatest one our country is going through, but also because ideas and perception of reality are grasped and understood very differently. And I'm just rethinking everything because of these encounters. And for me, someone who looks at ideas, it's important. In the book of Daniel, chapter 7, Daniel, a very talented dream solver in the court of Nebuchadnezzar, Babylon, witnesses 4 horrible beasts coming out of the ocean, each one more terrifying than its former. Some sort of lion, a bear, a 4-headed leopard, and the 4th one is the scariest one. With iron teeth and scary horns. Daniel interprets that the beasts represent 4 kingdoms, yet they will succumb under the kingdom of God in different variations. This is not a theology seminar. The beasts are a delightful metaphor, an exercise to help us think about the golden age of progressive Arab pedagogy, which paralleled the Mandate period, and as we shall see, not coincidentally. And its enemies, the 4 beasts, which prevented the kingdom of our wishful pedagogues who thought and wrote and taught about practical education, pragmatic education based on experimentation rather than mechanical repetition and recitation, a democratic and humanist education free of rigid classroom practices and hierarchies, and now, after Hillary's talk, free of exams, rigid exams, and standard awful exams. So the 4 beasts would the first one, knowledge transfer in the region, tradition and challenges. The second one is colonialism, British control, its cons and maybe pros. The educators, and expanding yet tough customers of revolutionary pedagogy advice. And the last one, the most fierce and gruesome beast, nationalism, the monster of all monsters. So the lecture will focus on Egypt, Palestine, and Iraq during the decades following the First World War, a period in which all three were under strong British influence and control. The sources used here are mainly pedagogic texts, books, journals written during this period, mainly three human examples, not beasts. One is Amir Bukhtur, the second is Khalil Totah, and the third is Fadil el-Jamali. The three, which some of you already know because they're famous, they're VIPs, are representatives of a generation who was deeply invested in how public education should look like. They asked the hardest questions about their societies and engaged in teacher training and curricula writing. To use the delightful metaphor, they fought or attempted to tame the beasts. The phenomenon, thoughts, and challenges discussed here are not particular to the Middle East. On the contrary, many of them can be found during that period across the globe. And also, just to give an excuse to what I'm going to say, it's work in progress. So I'm just working on this. Don't take it like really seriously. So, Belle Epoque of pedagogic thought, right? Post-war. The end of World War I marked the Ottoman departure, the establishment of new political entities with their own education systems, and in the case of Egypt, greater autonomy and internal state administration, that is, education. This was, however, under the dominance of Great Britain, which during those decades had great influence on state policy, both internal and external. In Palestine, even more in the field of education. This foreign control enabled, or at least did not prevent, this discourse. Arab intellectuals were engaging with modern pedagogy since the mid-19th century, but an Arab pedagogic discourse emerged after the Great War. The gradual expansion of a literate community, which started decades earlier, was accelerated with the opening, especially in Palestine and Iraq, of elementary government schools in villages that were predominantly illiterate. Education became a public issue, going through a process of professionalization, previously dominated by sheikhs or ulama, clergymen, or of diverse skills and training. It turned into a scene led by young teachers who were trained in modern schools in the urban centers of Cairo, Jerusalem, Beirut, and Baghdad. The teachers' training institutions shaped the pedagogic discourse of the time. These institutions resembled high school more than they did universities and were engaged in inculcating modern values and proper education. But they were also to answer such questions as what education is, what sort of relationship should be established between teacher and student, how should knowledge be transferred, and so on. These questions gained great relevance during the interwar with the establishment of state education systems and the appointment for the first time, especially in Iraq and Palestine, of locals to administer their own education systems. It was centered in Istanbul, the center of the empire, and the people who headed the ideas and thoughts were young Ottomans. But they also gained relevance for the first time for two main reasons. So first, and this was a global issue, modern pedagogy was revolutionized with the ascendance of psychology and modern education trends, especially progressive education. And we must bear in mind that public education was more than a century old in Western Europe and the US. And it was mature enough to question some of its foundations. And this is what we see in the turn of the century, people questioning what was built in the nation state from late 18th century into the 19th century. In this region, it exploded. Public education was an explosion. that happened mainly after the First World War, and it sent a shockwave that threatened to change every aspect of these societies. So all the processes that we see in Western Europe and the United States here happen very condensedly in a very short period of time. And this is very important to all of our discussions, I think. The second reason is the human agents who translated, modified, and adjusted this revolution to their own communities. These were talented young people who were, for the first time in the history of the region, trained in postgraduate Western institutions in pedagogy, which was also going through a rapid process of professionalization. In the Anglo-Saxon world, the most important center of pedagogic thought was the Teachers' College of Columbia University. It was there that John Dewey and his progressive colleagues disseminated the ideas of pragmatism, pragmatic thought, pragmatism, and in education. What was it? It was ideas involved engaging with the value of knowledge and its determination through use and relevance, that school should be an integral part of community, that students ought to learn through experimentation and questioning of the things relevant to their lives. For students like Bukhtor, Totah, and Jamali, the enchantment from these theories did not come in a void. They were studying in the Big Apple, at the heart of the city that controlled the country, that almost controlled the entire world. Although progressive education was far more hegemonic in the US, far from hegemonic in the US, it was perceived as such by them, connected to the very essence of American success. Their dissertations in Columbia were published in English, and their policies, they manifested these ideas. Bukhtor was born in Asyut in 1898. He went to the American Missionary School there and proceeded to the American University of Cairo, where he would end up as Dean of the Department of Education. He finished his MA and published, when he finished his MA in the Teachers' College, he published a book called Al-Dunya fi America, The World in the US, praising not only the American way, focusing on its autonomous and dynamic education system, and on how Americanized Arabs are both culturally authentic and fully modern. His PhD, School and Society in the Nile Valley, widely cited in all studies of education and society of modern Egypt, severely criticized its very being, the education, British education and later state education under Wafdist Egypt and the palace and so on. So the main target was its centralism, disastrous centralism. Bukhtor climbed high in the American Institute. In terms of progressive education, he was more American than the American staff. He was of Copt origin, but was consistently blind to any bias to matters of creed. He was, I think, a humanist. For 4 decades, Bukhtor edited the Journal of Modern Education, Majallat al-Tarbiya al-Haditha, the Clarion of Progressive Pedagogy in Arabic, read across the region with contributors from across the region. Khalil Totah was born in Ramallah in 1886, was the son of Quaker converts, which is, I think, also influential in his education and later in his work. Like Bukhtor, he was educated under American missionaries. He earned his MA in pedagogy from Columbia, and it's not surprising that the British, when they occupied this country, after another famous educator quit his job, they appoint him to head the Arab College, the men's training college. So this famous college journal under Totah, which was, I think, at the time, the most important pedagogic stage during the mandate in Palestine, Majallat al-Kulliya al-Arabiya, or Majallat Dar al-Mu'allimin earlier. So for example, when Totah wrote an article, sometimes it did not come at first, right? His articles would come second, which is interesting, because in other versions, the principal would open and would give the framework for the entire journal. So it was not like that sometimes under Totah. And in general, I think these 5 years were very influential in the analysis of the college because of what Totah, the atmosphere that Totah brought, which was very different, I think, from his successor, Ahmed Samih al-Khalidi. So he did not survive for many reasons, and there are a few versions of why he was kicked out. I think he was literally kicked out by the students in 1925 during the demonstrations when Balfour came here to inaugurate the Hebrew University. And Totah's dissertation, after he's kicked out of after he's kicked out of the Arab College, he goes to write a PhD in Columbia. And his dissertation is about the contribution of Arabs to education. And there, what he did was cherry picking of classic Arabic thought, 1,000 years old, and he showed how basically progressive education and the ideas that he learned from Dewey, that was at the time at the college, were actually there in Arab thought during the golden age of Umayyad and Abbasid empires, and later also in the Mamluk, Egypt. Upon his return, he became the principal of the Quaker Friends School. Like Bukhtur, he remained at the American institution until the end of his educational career. In Friends, which still exists, he promoted the values of progressive education. Fadil el-Jamali, the third character, protagonist, was born to a Shia family. Again, a Copt, a Quaker, and a Shia, and Shia scholars, and educated, unlike the prior two, in classical Shia Islamic education. But then the American University of Beirut, and then the Teachers College in Columbia. And he wrote a dissertation called The New Iraq, in which he targeted and criticized, he tried to understand how Bedouins in the periphery should be educated in Iraq. And here, I mean, some of his thoughts and criticism, which can also be traced in Bukhtur and Totah's work. So he writes, for example, the present curriculum lacks direct bearing on the social and economic life of the people today. It is mainly literary and non-practical. Literary and non-practical. This is the main criticism of progressivists, pragmatists against classic education and tests and standardized tests, because they want education to be relevant to the person and its own environment and society. So all three, by the way, they kept a distance from religion. Religion was, as if religion was not fundamental and important. They were secularists in the deep meaning of secularism. So you could not find, for example, for 4 decades of Majallat al-Tarbiyya al-Haditha, you could not find articles about Islam or Christianity or revelation or even like deep thinking about it, like you would in all other journals published by teacher training colleges, like Al-Muallim al-Jadid, for example, which combined, the Iraqi one that Hillary mentioned, that combined some like classic Arab history or Islamic thought and progressive pedagogy. Yes. Okay. So the first beast. Let's talk about the rivals of these people. So the golden age, so the first one is tradition and known customs. I mean, how people were taught in the region. In the golden ages, Islamic and Arab scholarship, so they led the scientific scene. but this was not the case in the late 19th century, right? This was not the reality that Bukhtur, Totah, and Jamali saw in front of them when they talked about Arab education in their community. Islamic education was, the Kutab, for example, was based on recitation, repetition, and memorization. And of course, it revolved around a canonical text, the Quran. Higher education was also based on a canon, hadith and classical interpreters. By the way, memorization is still, I learned this from my students in Haifa, is still venerated, right? There are still competitions in schools in the Galilee of students who can recite Quran. So this is a skill that is still venerated in schools to this day. So something from this tradition still remains today. And they were blamed for this criticism because they wanted this canon out and to bring in a new canon not a canon, to bring in the relevance of society and community and environment. They were blamed for Americanizing the system and erasing Arab and Islamic tradition and heritage. So Bukhtur was blamed for being an American. And they said that he forgot himself and his authenticity. And the other tradition, not less important, was also mentioned earlier, is the Enlightenment pedagogy. Is Tahsin, Sati al-Husri, and also Ahmad Samikh al-Khalidi here in Palestine. So they underline the importance of classic Greco-Roman and Arabic tradition as a ticket of entry to modernity and to become like important countries, important communities, and regain the fame of the Golden Age. The second beast, this one, the leopard, is colonialism. The interwar time was a time of possibility and relative flexibility. Egypt was still controlled by the British, and so were Palestine and Iraq. When it came to pedagogy and educational policy, these were the days of conflicting ideologies and trajectories. Self-determination, independence, and freedom were the priority across the Middle East, and the luminary intellectuals were invested, again, with different nuances, to this project. Education, being a central pillar or tool in the formation of imagined communities, confined the pedagogical discourse to the construction of free, learned national subjects. All the roads led there. We'll get back to that, the fourth beast. Under the British, however, this created consistent friction and tension. The empire had no interest in mass education, or mass anything for that matter, nor mass loyalty, nor could they fund or administer mass education. Moreover, the British knew that any kind of empowerment of free-thinking pedagogues would eventually support a national movement that would eventually turn against them, like it happened, right? This anxiety was personified in Humphrey Bauman, which everyone knows, who lived to see 3 of his life projects in Egypt, Iraq, and Palestine crumble into themselves. In Egypt, he saw how the Egyptian nationals took over the British Ministry of Education, where he worked prior to World War I. In Mesopotamia, how he calls it, because he came before it was named Iraq. He saw the dissolution of his education system that he established there. And then in Palestine, where he thought it came only for 2 years and then ended up staying for 16 until the revolt, warning all the time against what was going on, and he predicted the catastrophe. So he saw, he went back to London and he saw the carnage of the Great Arab Revolt and later the Nakba of 1948. So Bauman really believed he was there to do good, to promote the natives, lead them to a better place. He was wholeheartedly invested in this project. But he was also an Anglo-Saxon supremacist who thought that he, rather than anyone else, the natives mainly, should be the one to do it. In Iraq and Palestine, Bauman established an education system based on the vision of the Commonwealth, But the locals wanted their own wealth, their own pedagogic vision. Third beast, scary one with the 4 heads. Universities, a local educators community, the ones threatening the thoughts of progressive educators. University and teacher training colleges taught about Dewey, and his ideas were echoed in AUB's curriculum. This was really this was the reality in the new universities and teacher training institutions. But the high demand for universal education and scarcity of trained personnel meant that often teachers were graduates of elementary education with a year or 2 in secondary education. In the villages where kutabs was still operated, local sheikhs were still the pillars of rural education. From the outset, then, many within the teacher community were not trained in any sort of pedagogic thought, and even if they did, the system had very limited potential, or in most cases, no potential, in furthering training and guidance of teachers once appointed as such. You would be trained as a teacher, you get the diploma, you get the certificate, they send you somewhere, and just do your thing. And don't bother us. And if you bother us, or you bother the students, we just send you somewhere else because we need you so bad, because there's a shortage of teachers. So Dewey was not important. The public school reality was tough, very tough. Many teachers headed an entire school by themselves or taught very large classrooms of mixed ages. Stories of violence and abuse of students were common. Most members of this community were not classic consumers of humanist progressive education. Fourth beast, the one, Roma. The most fierce of them all is nationalism, or how I like to call it, the bigger fishes to fry. So humanist education is a good idea, but the nationalist agenda always comes first. We want the child in the center, we wanted to experience and experiment in school, but we also wanted to sing the anthem and know well his duty for his community. Pragmatist education came supposedly without color or bias. It refrained from essentializing any creed or culture. This was the negative image of national education, which tends to focus primarily on its own group, on the negation of a national other, and on finding its own roots, own characteristics. National education asks what you can do for your country. Progressive education is focused on the individual, on pluralism, diversity. Each student, according to his own interest, abilities, progress. National education seeks mobilization, collective thinking, collective causes. It distances itself from individualism. Jamali, in that sense, and this is the last before I conclude, Jamali tried to combine the two, right? He was a pan-Arabist and a progressivist. He thought that this was a way to, this combination would actually lead to not only liberation, but also a change in the Iraqi education system or Arab education system. I don't know if it worked in the case of Iraq. So just to conclude, so these are the beasts. There were more, of course. Wars of independence, Nakba, post-colonial era, ended the Belle Epoque of pedagogic thought, giving way to ultra-nationalist or militarist education systems. Getting back to our Daniel sleeping here on the right, perhaps the answer is in his own status or perspective. He was, after all, an exile in Babylon, and his kingdom of heaven to come was conceived in and engaged with the exilic experience. Such was this progressive pedagogy, gaining prominence in exile, physical, material, or epistemological, manifesting a wishful thought which will surely come after the demise of the fourth and most atrocious beast. Thank you.